right. Today we're going to begin covering CSS, and CSS is a very broad topic. It's something I encourage you to try on your own, to try things on your own, especially if it's something that you want to do to your page and we haven't covered it in class. So experiment. We're going to cover the basic principles of how it works, and then we're going to cover certain number of details about it. But again, a lot of it is left for you to explore. And how do you explore that? One of the good ways is through the W3 School site. Which is a pretty good site for those of you that are first learning CSS. So you could look up CSS, start learning CSS, and there's something in particular that you want to learn. Like, for example, I want to style my links a certain way. Well, you just go over here to CSS links, and there's a discussion of how to make the links work a certain way. Nice thing about this is there's a try it yourself. So you can click on the button and it shows you how it's going to look, right? And you can change it then to anything that you want and test it out. If you don't like it just turning pink, you can mouse over it and make it big and make the font size bigger and also make it pink. So try this out. But again, we will cover the basics and we'll cover in the principles and we'll cover basics in this class today and over the next several weeks. For the rest of the semester, we're going to be covering these two topics sort of together. We're going to cover CSS and we're going to cover HTML. So we'll sort of bounce between those two topics. Now, let's look at the examples we have. And I want to show you the examples first, and then we will look at the details. I have a page, in fact, the page that we've been using all along. CISS page. Keep in mind that my goal here isn't to make the perfect looking page. My goal is to demonstrate certain things. We then have identical HTML, but different CSS. In other words, these two pages have the exact same HTML, yet they look very different. And that's the flexibility that CSS allows you. So CSS allows you to give your site a refresh without having to change any of the HTML code, especially if you share CSS between pages, which is a way that we're going to cover it. You can put CSS right in your code, right in your HTML code, but the more flexible way to do it is to put it within a separate file. So let's look at the first example. And we've seen the HTML before, but I'll open it up just in case we need to refer back to it. And I'm now going to open the CSS. Okay. Now, within the HTML, we have this statement here. Link. Now, this is different than a link that you click on. This is a link to a CSS file. So link type equals text/CSS, rel equals style sheet, href equals, and then you have the name of the style sheet. This is provided it's in the same folder. And again, notice there's no stuff in front of it like C:, /user/mzeller/whatever. It's just the name of the file, and that's because it's in the same folder as the HTML is. And we have both of our pages styled with the same style, so they have a consistent look. And that's important for websites. It's important that websites have a consistent look. Now, consistent doesn't mean that they need to look identical. Consistent means consistent. All right. In other words, you're probably not going to have a radically different color scheme on half the pages than the other half of the pages. You're going to try to have a consistent color scheme across the entire site. So I'm going to start out looking at this right here. We'll get back to these two. These three other rules. This is what often I'll refer to as a style rule. It tells how to style the particular elements on the page. So, HTML has defaults. If there's no CSS on the page, the default is for the H1s to be a particular size, H1s to be a particular font, H1s to have a particular background and have a particular color for the text. So these are all default behaviors that are built into the browser. However, we can overrule those defaults by putting code in our CSS. So all our CSS rules are going to look like this. We're going to have something before the curly brackets or braces. And this is called the selector. The selector, as the name implies, selects what on the page is going to get this style rule. Now we're going to start out with the most simple kind of selector possible, and that is an HTML tag. So what this particular selector means is every HTML tag on the page gets this style rule. The background is going to be this color. And we'll talk about that code in a minute, what that code means. The text color is going to be white. The font size is going to be 4EM. I end up moving some text around that I didn't want to do. Okay. So the style rule itself consists of pairs of things. There's the attribute and the value that we want. In fact, I'm just going to open these up in Notepad so I don't get all these fancy things moving around. All right, so this on the page gets this rules. The background color is set to this. Color of the text is set to this, and the font size is set to this. We'll look at each of those attributes in turn and identify what they mean. Now, the attributes, again, as I mentioned, are pairs of things, the parts of the style rule. They're the attribute itself and the value that we want to set it to. Those are separated by a colon. There's then a semicolon, and then there's the next pair of attribute and value. Semicolon, the next pair of attribute and value. And that can go on and on and on as long as you need it to be. So let's look at this one to start. Color white. What does that mean? That means that in each H1, the color of the text, so that's what color means. The color of the text is going to be white. And sure enough, if we look, here's an H1, the color of the text is white. Here's an H1, the color of the text is white, and so on down the line. So one way we can specify the color is with the name of the color. Well, can we just make up names for colors like, like the thing, dusty red? Is that something that's valid? I don't know. All right. So how do you know? You Google it, of course, because there's a lot of color names that are available and no one can memorize them all, but you can certainly Google them. We're going to look at HTML color names. And here's a list of some of them. Maybe this is all of them. I don't know. But a lot of them. So we can say we want the text to be Alice blue, antique white, aqua, beige, azure, aquamarine. So let's change it to beige. Change it to beige. Save it. Now when I refresh this page, you'll see everywhere where it is white in the H1s, it's going to change to beige. There it did. It's kind of not obvious maybe through the screen, but it did change it. Let's make it really obvious. Let's change it to red. Yeah, not saying it's going to look good, but it's going to demonstrate the point. So we change the text to red. We get that. So the one way you can set color is by typing in the name of the color, and you could there's a lot of colors available. You don't have to try to memorize them all. You can look them up to get the color that you want. So one way you can reference color is through the color attribute and the name. The other way you can do it, and this probably should say, you could say background or you could say background color. And we'll talk more about that in a minute here. All right. Or in a few minutes. But this is a second way to refer to colors. Pound sign and then 6 characters. Those 6 characters are hexadecimal digits. Now, I think some of you have done other kind of programming. Are you familiar at all with hexadecimal? No?
Is it hexadecimal?
Hexadecimal. It's okay if you're not.
I can't remember doing it in the intro course to C#. Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay if you're not. Hexadecimal is base 16. All right. If you think about it, computers work with powers of 2 really well, right? There's either current or there's not current. 2 choices. Well, if you combine some of those together, combine 4 of them together, you get base 16. And in base 16, instead of the numbers 0 through 9, like we have in the decimal system, base 10, is our regular number system, which is decimal. Here we have 0 through F.
Wait, I think I actually know this one because I'm taking a CISS216. I think Professor Nealon was introducing us to this.
That's
I
right.
remember this one.
So this is hexadecimal. And in hexadecimal, in the decimal system, our numbers go 1 or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we go with 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3.
Binary. I think isn't it usually in binary or something like that for hexadecimal?
No. In hexadecimal, the digits go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A.
There we go. A, yeah.
which is equivalent to decimal 10. B, C, D, E. So in other words, after that, we would get 1 0, 1 1, 1 2, 1 3, 1 4, all the way up through 1 F. And we go 2, 0, 2 1, 2 2, 2 3, all the way up through 2 F. Finally, the highest number in our decimal system is 99, or 2 digits, that is. In hexadecimal, the highest number you get is 2 Fs, because that's the highest digit in the ones place rather, and in the 16s place. FF. Okay. We're going to come to some good news in a minute here. All right. And that good news is, I hope that you understand what I said about hexadecimal. But if you don't, you can still use this anyhow. All right. In the hexadecimal code, there's typically 6 hexadecimal digits. And we can break them up to 3 pairs. The first pair represents how much red is in the color. The second represents how much green is in the color. And the third represents how much blue is in the color. So this particular color code, FF, means all the red that you can possibly have. Thinking this, if you had spotlights and you could dim them, and you were aiming the spotlights onto a circle on the wall, all 3 of those spotlights to a circle on the wall. FF for red means that the red spotlight is turned on full blast. Can't get any higher. 0 0 means the green spotlight is turned off. There's no green light in it. And finally, FF means the blue is turned all the way on. So what do you think that color would represent? FF00FF. Purple, right? Because it'd be equal parts red and blue. If we did this, change that to AA, what do you think would happen? It'd become more red. In other words, it would be a reddish shade of purple instead of a blue shade of purple. Now, if we did the opposite, it would be a bluish shade of purple. If we did something like this, it'd be a darker shade of purple, right? Because we turn down those lights. So there's not as much red light, not as much blue light. It'll be an even purple, but it will be a darker purple. Some of them aren't intuitive. For example, because I don't think they're intuitive. Red and green actually give us yellow. All right. It's not necessarily intuitive, but it's true. Now, I mentioned there's good news. The good news is if you don't understand that, you can just use charts to find the color that you want and paste that in here. So let's just do a couple of these just to demonstrate it, and then we'll look up the charts. So if I do FF 0 0 0 0, the red is turned up all the way, the green and the blue are turned off, so that will be red. The background So the H1 will be red. If we do FF00FF, it's going to be purple. If we turn these down, is there a question? It's a darker purple. Believe it or not, that's a purple. Might be hard to read because I made it a very dark purple. Let's make it more like 330033. Okay, that might be easier to tell that that's a darker shade of purple. Now, if we go something like this, it's a shade of yellow. All right. So the good news, as I mentioned before, is you don't have to understand anything I said about hex and just know that you can copy the codes if you want. But I think it is good to have a basic idea. For example, if you have a color that you like and you want to make it brighter, well, you put higher digits in. If you want to make it more red, you up the red values. Let's Google and see some HTML color codes. This is pretty valuable. This allows us to pick. We wanted a green, for example, but we wanted it to be a dark green like that. It tells us that the value is 378109. So I can copy that, put it in my code, and I'm good to go. Dark green. So this is a nice little color picker where you can slide it around, slide this around. It shows you the color. And you can go and pick the shade of the color that you want, and it will give you the hex code for it. So there's other charts. You can look at that give you the hex code as well. So you can look up and Google these things. There's a third way that you can identify colors, and that is through the RGB. With this, we use regular decimal numbers. So for example, if we wanted to make our background color this, question?
RGB, we also use RGBA.
Yes. We also use RGBA, which adds the opacity to it. In other words, is it see-through or not? We'll look at that in a second. In fact, we're using that here. But I could do RGB 914029. Get that color. We'll leave it at that. That's not too terrible. All right. Now, these are ways that you can designate colors. How do you choose what are good colors to go together, though? Well, that's a good question. We probably all know people whose clothes just go really well together. They just have a way of matching colors so that it looks good. And then you have people like me who have no idea how to match clothes together. And you just end up wearing what you end up wearing, and whether it matches or not is kind of up to the stars. Fortunately for all of us, there are color generators. Where I can go in and I can generates random. This is going to want us to buy something, never mind. This allows us to pick a basic color. Like, let's say it's going to be fall, so I want an orangish theme for this. It allows us to pick the style. Analogous is styles or colors that are very close together on the color wheel. Monochromatic are even closer together on the color wheel. Well, they're not closer horizontally, they're closer vertically. Triad is where they are spread apart like a triangle. Complementary is where they're across from each other. Now this is color theory. So we can say that these follow a certain logic and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. So if we want an analogous one, that looks good to me. I could pick something like this color for the background. And then maybe for another part of the page, say H2s. We'll make nav. And we get our sections of the page. With this color scheme. So use color generators to come up with color schemes of the page. That's can be very, very useful.
Is there a specific one you recommend?
No, it depends on the mood, the kind of site it is. If you were doing a fan site for the film Barbie, guess what? You're probably going to use pink. All right. If you're doing a fan site for Ozzy Osbourne, you're probably going to pick black. All right. If you're doing a patriotic website, you probably pick red, white, and blue. If you were doing a website about Iceland, let's say, maybe you pick white and blue. I think that's the color of their flag. But anyhow, it just depends. So the mood that you pick, the colors that you pick really just depend on what you're trying to portray on the site. My suggestion is to experiment with these things and come up with something that you like. All right. Let's finish this style roll up and look at font size 4M. 4M means is 4 times as bigger as normal. If I make this 1M, then that font is the normal size of fonts. If I make it 10M, then it's really big letters. So 4M is emphasis, and what emphasis means is how big compared to the normal default. Again, notice all of these are the name of the attribute, a colon, the value of the attribute, then a semicolon, and the next pair. All right, let's look at these. This is 2 different ways to do opacity. Opacity is how see-through something is. An opacity of 1 is solid. And if I represent a color and I don't supply the opacity, it's assumed to be a solid block of that color. I can specify the color to something, though, using, as was mentioned previously, RGBA, and I can give as the last value this red, green, blue, and the opacity. What does the A mean in that case?
The percentage of them.
Yeah, it is a percentage, but I'm wondering what the letter stands for. Alpha channel. Okay, that makes sense. Which is basically how see-through it is. So if I make this a 0.5, it's halfway see-through. So let's look at our paragraphs on this page. Paragraphs, if you notice, you can see the background image peeking through it. You can see it for the paragraphs, but you can't see it for the H1s or H2s. Or I'm sorry, you can see it for the H2s. You can't see it for the H1s. The navigation has a 0.7, and this is a different way of representing the opacity by saying opacity 0.7. Either of those work. I make the number higher, it becomes more solid. I make the number lower, and it becomes more see-through. All right, notice I made that 0.1. It's see-through to the point almost of being invisible. I made this at 0.9. It almost looks like it's solid. All right. Now, the last one we have to look at is the body. Now, the body tag, we have something else in the, we supply a background color. And we supply a background URL. And that is an image. And the image, again, is in the same folder. So I don't have to specify the path to it. And then I specify for this no repeat. If I don't specify that, it will tile. In other words, it will show multiple copies of the image tiled on top of each other. Why do I have the color? I have the color just in case something went wrong and that image was deleted or accidentally got renamed. Do that. So if it can't find the image, it will use the background color to find. I think we can sort of see where the term style sheet comes from. Oh, this is also relevant to background color. Because if you notice, we open this in a text editor, or an image editor rather. PNG files can have transparency in them. So can GIF files. JPEG files cannot. So in this case, notice we see the color where the image is transparent. And you can tell when you open the editor, depending on the editor, you get this little checkerboard. It means that it's transparent background. So wherever it's transparent, we see the background color I defined in the style sheet. Now, one more thing I would like to talk about is the word cascading in cascading style sheets. Right? Where does the cascading come in? The cascading comes in this way. That we know how our page is nested. The body contains the header section, contains the nav section, contains these articles, and so on. If I specify a rule on a body, that rule carries over through everything underneath the body unless we overrule that with a more specific. So let's make to make this obvious, let's make the background color or the text color red. Not pound sign red, just red. Notice that this is red. This is red. Paragraph is red. And so on. Yet these are not. Why aren't these? Well, because we overruled that style rule on a more specific level. The H1 tag content is more specific to an H1 than it is the body. It's in the H1, which is in the body. So therefore, the H1 style rule to make it a color of white overrules. We don't, however, on the paragraph and then on the nav section, declare a text color. Therefore, it gets the color of text that we defined on the body. This is a key concept. Look, for example, in H2. In H2, we don't have any style rules defined. Therefore, it's going to get the style rule on the body. Other than the background image. So by intelligently setting up your style rules, you can very concisely describe how you want your pages to look without specifying how every individual element looks. Now, one thing you might have noticed is the links look different. The links are a class all under themselves. All right, the links we'll consider separately. Okay, let's look at this one. So the HTML of this is the same. Look at the HTML. It's identical. Well, yeah, it's identical. CSS, though, is different. All right. First thing we do is we specify a margin of nothing on everything. That's what the asterisk means. Asterisk for selector means every HTML tag. If you get rid of it, page looks like this with little gaps in between things. Notice how that moved down, that moved down, that moved down, because we put a margin on everything. We put it back, things will tighten up a little bit. All right. Our body has a background URL of tile.png. Notice we don't have no repeat. Therefore, this image which is really just this, forms an interlocking tile. Like, you know, you might have floor tiles or something, or wall tiles like this, that when you piece them together and you line them up correctly, it forms a larger pattern. Nice thing about this is this scales. You make your page bigger and it extends. You scroll down and it extends. So tiles are a way to put a nice little sort of decoration on the page. If you look up HTML background tiles or CSS background tiles, you can find a bunch of them. Now, here's where we start playing around a little bit more with the layout. This is review. Oh, we have font family. The font family is Broadway, ABC, Sans Serif. All right. It's going to go down in order and try each of these fonts until it finds one that is on the computer that's displaying the web page. Not every computer has every font loaded. If you have, for example, an old computer, if you have a Linux machine versus a Windows machine, you may or may not have certain fonts loaded. The last one is sort of a default if it can't find any of them. Can't find any of them, it uses a generic sans serif font. And what is sans serif? It means without serifs. Now, what's a serif? A serif is the little thingy on the end of each letter. So let's look at century, type something in. Notice there's a little foot on the end of the F. There's a little curlicue on the end of the F. There's a little thing on the end of the S. That's a serif font. An example of a sans serif font would be on Windows, Arial, which is like the classic font Helvetica. I was going to describe the difference between the two. A serif font gives more of a sort of a classical look, whereas the sans serif font gives sort of a cleaner, more modern look. And it's okay to mix. Sometimes you'll use serif fonts for headlines and sans serif fonts for the text, because sans serif fonts are better at smaller text sizes. So let's look up the Wall Street Journal, for example. For at least some of these, like here's an example. Headline is in a serif font. The text is in a sans serif font. So it's okay to mix and match, all right? And a strategy of mixing and matching is a good strategy if you make serif fonts for the headings, sans serif for the text. Now, mixing too many fonts and your page looks like a ransom letter, right? So you want to avoid that, just as you want to avoid mixing too many colors. Use fonts, use colors to emphasize things and organize things. And if you use different colors to sort of highlight certain areas, if everything's a different color, then nothing's highlighted. Whereas if you very carefully choose to highlight certain things with a special color, then those things stand out from the rest of the page. Same idea with fonts. Now what we'll finish up here is we'll introduce this, and we'll talk more about this later. Width describes how big, how wide something is. So I'm going to make the header, the nav, the article, and the footer 600 pixels wide. Now, this is just for examples. Usually you don't pick a hard-coded number like that. But that'll make this 600 pixels wide. So if we look at this on the page, this is 600 pixels wide. Well, 600 plus some. Margin we define as 0px auto. What that does is that puts on the top and bottom, this goes around like a clock, 0px is the top, auto is the left, 0px is the bottom, auto is the right. So this particular style centers the thing on the page. So those 600 pixels are right in the middle of the page. And if we resize it, it moves it over. Same thing with the header, the footer, we keep them all together. Padding is the space between the edge of the content and where the text begins. So if we say no padding, we don't put a padding number in. Let's do that on the header. That header is crammed right up against the edge of those 600 pixels. So when you determine the full size of this, this actually takes up 628 pixels because it takes up 600, padding to the right, padding to the left. If you only specify one number, that number applies for the top, left, bottom, and right. Now again, nice thing about this is we can put it on another page and we get that look. If we change things on the page, if we make the header yellow, this page and this page automatically get the changes. This, by the way, with maybe a little bit of adjustment, is a good layout for simple pages. It's a single column. This will also display pretty nicely on a mobile device, I would think. We can actually test that out by going to Developers Tools and we can see how it would look in different iPhone 12 Pro, that's what it would look like. Galaxy Fold, that's what it would look like. Pixel 5, that's what it would look like, and so on. It doesn't look half bad. There's ways that we could improve that, right? And we'll talk about those later, but it doesn't look horrible on this, on a mobile device. And that's always a consideration. Okay. Your next lab is to create a style sheet in its own file and link the 2 pages that you've been using in previous labs on it. I think use the previous labs. I don't remember. You'll read it on Canvas. Feel free to use as much about CSS as you can. So you're not limited to the stuff that we talk about in class. One thing that one of my friends said one time is what they like about school is you could always do more than the assignment asks for. Where on the job, sometimes you get in trouble if you do more than the assignment asks for. But here, you can actually do more. All right, that's all I had for this. We'll continue the rest of the semester going over sans serif, right? CSS and HTML. All right, we'll either see you in lab or we will see you next week.